Great. So if you're just joining us now, I would encourage you to use the chat. We'd love to see where you're joining from, your name, organization, and we'll get started. Thanks. So today, maybe I'll introduce myself first. For those of you who don't know, my name is Amber Bennett, and I have been helping to lead the Climate Narratives Initiative, which is based here in Canada. And I'll be joined today with my colleagues, Maria and Kara Pike. Kara is the Executive Director of Climate Access, and we've been working over the past year to produce and make meaning out of a number of different pieces of analysis that we've done. And for those of you who didn't catch the webinar last week, we'll share most of those as we go through the material and through the webinar today. Maria Granados is the Climate Communications Coordinator, and you've received many communications from her over the past couple of weeks as well. So between the three of us, we'll be walking through the workshop today, and we also have a number of generous facilitators who have offered their time, and you'll be spending time with them in the breakout rooms. So really today's session is focused on the Communicating Climate Change in Canada and the Energy Transition Playbook that we released last week, and we'll be giving you a fresh version today. And I encourage you to take a look at that. There's a lot of background material that we won't be covering today. Really, today's focus is on providing some time to connect with each other, to talk through it, and to practice what this might look like in the work that we do, to share with each other and connect with other folks who are doing this work across Canada and the United States. We have three parts. So the first part, we'll be looking a little bit at the tool itself. And then in the second part, we'll look at some examples of what this looks like in practice. In the third part, we'll be breaking out into groups, into rooms. And then we'll come back together again to share a little bit. Just to say, the playbook itself is based on a number of pieces of work we've done over the last year. So one of those was a public opinion roll-up. We did a media analysis. We did some message testing on energy transition here in Canada. And we've also infused all of that with what we know to be best practice. So we've tried to do our best to make sense of this. We hope that this is one of a number of different events that we'll be hosting. We're excited to say that we're setting up a more permanent project at the University of Winnipeg to support climate communications in Canada. So please look out for more information about that. I will jump in and hand this over to Maria first she has a poll, and the breakout sessions that we're doing we're hoping to group people based on the region that they're working in. So Maria, I'm going to hand it over to you right now to kind of ask people, and we'll get a gauge of how many people are from the different regions.
Great, thank you so much, Amber. So I'm going to launch the first poll right now. You might have to scroll down to be able to see all of the options, but like Amber mentioned, we're going to be breaking the rooms out regionally. So if you could just select which region you would like to be a part of, or if you would like to be on a national room, that would be really helpful. So like I said, not all of the regions might be visible just on the first screen, so you might have to click and scroll down.
And for those of you who are just joining us now, we're just getting a gauge of how many people we have from each region, and this will help inform the breakout rooms, which are in the second half of the workshop. And if you haven't already, please do introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, and also your name and your organization.
So we'll just give a couple more. is there an Eastern Canada group versus the Atlantic Canada group? So there is a Central Canada, which covers kind of like Ontario, Quebec, and then the prairies would be Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan. Ten more seconds here. Great. All right, so I am going to go ahead and close the poll here.
And Maria, there was a question if we can share the playbook, and absolutely we'll do that. So we'll pop the link into the chat here so that you have it.
Okay, that sounds good. So I will go ahead and use this information to create the breakout rooms, but I will let you take it away here, Amber.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump in. So can everybody see the opening slide? Can I get a thumbs up, Maria? Okay, that's great. All right, so the first piece here is I'm just going to walk through some of the background information. It's going to be a really quick run through, and I hope that if you haven't already, you can find all of the supporting information in our public opinion roll-up that we released earlier this spring, as well as we cover it more in depth in the webinar that we hosted last week. So generally, the good news is that most Canadians understand that climate change is a big problem, and they're seriously worried about it. Not sure if that's good news, but it is the case. In terms of the energy transition, people definitely think that it's happening and that it's inevitable, and this kind of holds across all the provinces. Support for clean energy is very high. And that's also true across all demographics and regions. And these attitudes weren't necessarily wiped out by the pandemic. Most people want climate leadership. We can see that in the election that we recently had. And they support, and there's a lot of support for impacted workers and communities. The public it's not only the public that's on board. In the media analysis that we also released earlier this year, we see that the media is covering climate change, they're covering energy transition, and for the most part, quite favorably and positively. Over 80% of the stories were pro-climate action. We also see that the recent events that we've experienced, so flooding, heat waves, et cetera, has also been increasing concern in Canada. And most people, or most Canadians, are making a connection between extreme weather and climate change. So what's the bad news? So the bad news is, and again, encourage you to take a look at the public opinion polling that we released, is that we see consistently 3 obstacles to engagement. And these obstacles have been constant for at least a decade, and they are also consistent across polls that we've seen more recently. And those include literacy and proximity, and I'll briefly touch on that, efficacy and relevance. So when we're talking about literacy, still most Canadians do not understand what climate change is. In focus groups, people are referencing the ozone hole. And when we look at solutions, they're often situated around recycling or plastic straws, somewhere in that kind of environmental bucket. And most people are not able to reference like a relevant climate policy. Proximity, so that's how people understand this is going to impact me and my family or my community. Most Canadians still don't understand or don't believe that this will harm them personally. It's up to 2/3. There was a recent Environics poll that came out. Up to 2/3 place the impacts or the harm of climate change to other people and to future generations, kind of somewhere in the future. And more importantly, most people are still thinking about the impacts of climate change environmentally. So this is around weather and coastlines and that kind of thing, not necessarily social and economic. So people are not necessarily drawing a line of sight to social or economic sectors. So the kind of major impacts, they're not foreseeing major impacts to their families, homes, health, et cetera. So in terms of efficacy, this is in terms of like what I can do and what leaders can do or what governments can do. More than half, so about 60%, believe that even if governments try, they won't be able to reduce emissions. And 1 in 5 worry that we're past the point of no return. So this kind of lack of efficacy is also related to other obstacles that we see, namely kind of apathy and ambivalence. And that ambivalence piece is like, we want our cake and we want to eat it too. So we see still high support for clean energy, but also high support for continuing to develop oil and gas production. We also see that even when prompted, people, that fossil fuels are the cause of climate change, up to 24% or a quarter of the population would still say that. Okay, I think,
ask you to.
Amber, you're just on mute, so you just want to unmute yourself there.
there we go. And so we see a quarter of the population still not sure if we need to move away from fossil fuels completely. And finally, the last one has to do with relevance. And this is really in some ways a communications obstacle. And this looks like polarization generally. So we see that people who have left-leaning views tend to see climate change harming them more personally. They also tend to have higher levels of support for policies. We know that in part, this is because people filter information through their worldviews, through their values, and through the cares and concerns of people who are like them. And so when we situate, or when climate change is situated in environment, and most people don't see themselves as environmentalists, it becomes less relevant for them. In part, and I would encourage you to take a look at the media analysis, this may have to do with the way that we're talking about it, or how the narrative of climate change is showing up in Canadian conversation. So we know that most media is focusing on what politicians are doing. It's filtered through an economic or a policy frame, tends to be super technical, and the kind of language that we're using is often obscure for people. People really don't know what we're talking about. Emissions, GHGs, decarbonization, net zero, this kind of language isn't really relevant for people, and they're not making a connection to like their personal lives, their families, their communities, livelihoods, etc. And so these kind of 3 barriers, this kind of literacy, proximity, the efficacy, and the relevance are, as I said, are consistently showing up, and they're consistently kind of the obstacles that we're finding to public engagement. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over now to Kara to kind of walk us through how we've made sense of that and the tool that we've developed. So Kara, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Amber. And before we dive into the tool, I just want to recognize Chris Hatch's contribution to the playbook. He wasn't able to join us today, but he really did a lot of the work behind this. So what we've come up with is organizing the playbook around a messaging triangle. And this triangle is essentially intended to hit on the key themes that you want to integrate and repeat in your communications, understanding that we still have to tailor specific messages to the interests, concerns, and values of those we're trying to engage. If you want to go to the next slide, when you hit the points on the triangle, you remove those 3 barriers to engagement that Amber just laid out, and give your the folks you're trying to engage a complete narrative, a full picture of both the threat, the pathway forward, and the benefits of taking action. You can start at any point in the triangle, depending on who you're trying to engage. For example, putting out the benefits, which is essentially the vision of where the pathway gets you, can often be a compelling place to start. Just to note too, that this is balanced so that 1/3 of the framing is the challenge. It's the tough stuff. It's calling it as it is. But 2/3 is formula, because the pathway is what can we do about that challenge? And then the benefits is really, again, the opportunity or the vision. So just to quickly point out before Maria takes us through a few examples of this triangle in play and some communications efforts that we've uncovered. Just to mention that the challenge, it's really important to name the problem, that we're dealing with climate pollution from fossil fuels. If it's better for your audience, if they're not as ready to jump right into climate change, you can start with extreme weather impacts as the challenge, but still really important to link that to the root cause that's driving it, which is climate pollution from fossil fuels, and getting to the root of that problem. And in Canada, the biggest category of emissions that we have to deal with is from our oil and gas sector. The pathway, really sort of stepping back from all the technical policy details that often we can get pulled into, and really thinking about articulating the big picture. What are some of the key steps we can take, such as cleaning, fortifying the grid, electrifying buildings, vehicles, transportation, and giving examples of that in play, of that actually happening in Canada. So we really normalize this pathway as something already that we're on and has benefits, and we need to keep going with it. And just to point out, the benefits really need to be tangible, relevant for people. What does it mean for people's lives when we take this action? We can point to moving away from boom and bust resource extraction into good, stable jobs and clean energy, and in particular, providing opportunities for young people. You can lean into the health benefits of protecting air quality, water quality. You can also lean into leadership. It's the right thing to be doing, and Canada has stepped up before in the past, and we can do it again. Often you do face challenges of people thinking that Canada's ahead. We're not really the climate problem that we are. And so almost surpassing that to some extent and just saying, look, we have stood up and stepped up in the world before to take on great challenges. We have the capacity, ability. Let's do it again. So that's just the triangle in a nutshell. There's a lot more detail with specific points to lean into under all three, but I'm going to turn it back over to Maria to walk us through those examples.
All right, thank you so much, Kara. Sorry, I was having some trouble unmuting it here. So Amber, if you could go into the next slide here. Thank you so much. So I'm going to share some examples of the messaging triangle at play. So we have some examples on social media, in conversation, and in the media here. So the first one that I wanted to begin with is this Science Moms Facebook ads. So this is a really great example of a group who has a clearly defined audience, and they do a really good job of outlining the challenges, the benefits, and the pathway. So I'll get you to click the next, just click, and then there we go. So here you can see the challenge that they outline is polluted air. So they talk about how their county in Arizona has some of the most polluted air in the country, and they give a really good clear stat. 1 in every 9 children has asthma. So the threat here that they're outlining is the threat to their children's health, and so this is really what's driving their motivation and their call for action. The source that they outline could be a little bit better. Not really sure how many people are familiar with that source, but overall, the challenge is outlined really clearly. So then they move on to the pathway there. So it says, a group of local moms worked with the League of Conservation Voters, which is a group in the States, to bring the state's first zero emissions electric bus. So they're demonstrating that people like them can really make a difference when they get together. They have a really clear, practical, tangible action, which was to try to get a zero emissions bus in order to help reduce pollution. And they are really playing up to the fact that clean energy and electric vehicles are really popular solutions. And then I'll just get you to click one more time. Once again, there we go. And then the benefit that they have there, they're saying, you know, having electric school bus tells me that things can happen because this community has power. Once the community knows that the power is there, they will exercise that power. And so they're talking about, you know, all of the benefits to the children's health. It's a really local campaign, a local solution. It's really empowering, talking about leadership and innovation, and how when a group comes together, it can be really efficient and powerful. So I'll go on to the next slide. So I want you to pay attention to this next video. It's a conversation between Katherine Hayhoe and Jimmy Kimmel talking about the energy transition. So this summer, there was a whole bunch of late night shows that, that had a bit of a climate change focus. So this is just a 2-minute clip that I'm going to ask Amber to share. And Amber, if you could unmute yourself so that we can really hear the video. So I'm going to challenge you guys to try to pay attention, and in the chat as we go through it, put down what you see, the challenge, the pathway, and the benefits of this video, what they might be.
Not in that 7%, but rather in the bottom half of the percent. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'll be like the uncle at Thanksgiving who doesn't believe in any of this stuff, who thinks it's a bunch of liberal garbage and says the climate is the climate and the earth has been going through these cycles for thousands of years, and it's just, there's nothing we can do about it. What do you say to that person?
Well, first of all, you got to address what he said. And I would simply say, that's not true. According to natural cycles, we should be getting cooler right now. Instead, we're getting warmer. But don't take a breath. Immediately pivot to something that he might care about. Uncle, what was your name again? Uncle?
Ernie.
Uncle Ernie.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Ernie, did you know that China is beating the pants off the United States when it comes to clean energy? Are you okay with that? Because I'm not.
Well, the hell I am. No, no, I'm not okay with that at all. We got to beat the Chinese at everything, even checkers.
Exactly. And you know where we have the most wind and the most solar energy potential? Right up the middle of the country where you live, Uncle Ernie.
You're saying we got the most wind of anybody?
That's right.
Well, that's good news.
It is. And you know what? We have the biggest army base in the US in Texas, and it gets almost half of its power from clean energy, and it is saving us tens of millions of taxpayer dollars. I love that. Don't you, Uncle Ernie?
I do love that. I do love that. Now, what are we going to do about the Mexicans?
Give them jobs putting up those wind turbines and solar panels.
Uncle Ernie is very, very difficult. I better take off the hat.
All right, thank you, Amber. So like I said, I just want you guys, if you can, to try to identify what the challenges, the opportunity, and the pathway was in the chat, but I'll go over it here. So what I really like about Catherine's approach here was a strong emphasis on the benefits and the pathways. So you can see that the challenge is not necessarily defined as a specific issue, but rather an opportunity to act and provide clean energy here. So she begins the video by addressing the misinformation and then pivoting the conversation to something that her uncle might really care about. So for Uncle Ernie here, maybe like there is a strong sense of nationalism, and so highlighting how the USA could be leaders in electric or in renewable energy would be a point that would really resonate with him there. And then she did a really good job at highlighting specific local examples. So Catherine is based in Texas. So she was talking about how that region has some of the highest wind and solar potential in the country, talking about how the Army base is being powered by renewables, and kind of sharing that sense of pride with her uncle there, and then highlights the cost saving benefits of the clean energy. So those are kind of, she did a really good job of hitting those 3 points of the triangle there. And so then finally, I'll just go on to my last example. So I wanted to share an example of the messaging triangle at play in the media, but I want to preface that by saying that this was a bit of a challenge for me to find an example. If we think back to the media analysis that we shared earlier this year, a lot of the stories that cover climate and the energy transition are really like heavy on policy and economics. So it was really kind of tricky to avoid that kind of techno speak. But this here is a story about on CTV News that talks about the new Traverse Solar Energy Project, which is the largest photovoltaic power station in Canada, and it's actually in a small county here in southern Alberta called Vulcan County. So the challenge that they're highlighting here is that there is some large regional debt, but there's also an additional challenge that there is a highly polarized energy conversation in Alberta. So what they do is they're highlighting the pathway or a solution, or a possible pathway is this big energy projects. It's a 700 million solar energy project, and it's going to bring lots of really great benefits to the community. So you can see here, the project like this is in excess of $500 million coming into the community, which means a lot. Other benefits that they're highlighting is that Vulcan County is seen as very desirable and can attract more renewable energy projects. And in other articles that I saw that are related to this one, they really highlight and focus on the jobs. So this is just another example of how people are using them, like a version of the messaging triangle, to hit all of those 3 points to kind of create a story. And that is what we're going to be doing in the breakout rooms. But before we move on, I'm just going to pass it back to Kara to go over some final tips on how to effectively use the triangle in our conversations here.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go through this in detail because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for the breakouts, but just to note that the guide is very much focused on framing, but that's just part of opening the conversation. And so we do have final tips in there about the importance of relationship building, peer-to-peer relational campaigning, confronting false information in the way that Maria just highlighted, Catherine Hayhoe doing so well, visual communications, and then really working in an iterative ways, listening and using data to drive decisions. So there's more on that in the guide for everyone to check out. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. So Maria, I will allow you to open up the breakout session. And while you do that, I'm going to pop into the chat a little worksheet that we've prepared that will that your facilitators will be using in the chat. So helpful for you to kind of have that document open. So I'll do that, but I'll hand it back over to you, Maria, to give us some instructions on where we're going.
Okay, great. So I have created 8 breakout rooms. Each of them has a facilitator already assigned to them. I will be staying in the main room for those that are calling in from their phone and can't be put into a breakout room. And so I'll just be here kind of holding down the fort. But you will get the opportunity to just select a room. And then I will just go in, and I might have to do a little bit of shuffling just to make sure that the balance is equal, but just go and select the region that you are interested in joining us in from. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms here. And you are able to join a room. And I will say that there were just a couple of people in Atlantic, and they can stay here with me if they wanted, or yeah, in Atlantic, Canada. So there was just very few rooms.
Maria, I didn't have anything pop up on my screen.
Sorry, who was just?
My name is Michelle Sheardown. I didn't have anything pop up.
Michelle, let me put you into, what region would you be interested in?
Pacific, please.
Pacific, great.
Thank you.
I'm also the same. It's Teresa Beer. Nothing popped up. Pacific as well.
Yeah, Stephen Thomas, nothing popped up for me either.
Okay,
And Tom Green.
I will.
And Rob Bernhardt. Sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, me too. Beatrice Coco. I guess I could.
Jalen Wong as well.
I think if we have the option to just join one of the groups, should we just join one that says like Central Canada, and does it matter which one to go into?
Yes, correct.
But nothing's popping up on the screen though.
I will have to assign you guys as they go.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
If it's not popping up for you, which I'm not sure.
It says breakout rooms in progress, but I'm not seeing how I would join.
Just one moment.
Central. Okay.
So is anybody here in like Central Canada that I might be able to assign? Alex, are you in? Is there an Alex link?
I see with me a tick mark beside Meredith National. Is that a suggestion I should join that? I'm happy to.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I get it now.
And then Allison Murray.
Pacific, please.
And then Ananda.
Pacific, please.
Pacific.
Thank you.
And then Andy.
Prairies, please.
Debbie.
Thank you.
Sorry, Pacific?
For Debbie.
Pacific.
Elise. Okay, Gail.
Pacific?
Okay, the Pacific group is getting quite big, so I'm gonna make a second one, and this one can be our second Pacific group. Jalen.
National, please.
National.
Thank you.
We'll put you here. Christy. Christy Signer. All right, how about Liza?
Pacific or national, doesn't matter.
All right, I'll leave you here, Liza. And then Rita. Oh, Rita, you are on mute.
Oh, yeah. So I presume I can't even see a listing of the regions. So what is it? Central or national? I don't know.
Okay, just which are you working mostly on the national level, or are you working in groups within? I'm not sure where you're calling it.
Been working in the local level in Toronto, but have other interests as well. Doesn't matter.
All right, I will add you into a central group.
Thank you.
Sandy.
Prairies, please.
Sheila.
National Canada, please.
National. Great.
Great, thank you.
Tina.
National Canada?
Great. Shelley.
Yeah, it could be Pacific or national.
Okay, I will leave you here.
Okay.
And then Sandy. Is Sandy Aberdeen with us here?
Yeah, could you, prairies, please?
Then we have Victor.
Prairies, please.
Prairies. And Victoria?
National.
Great. And then Jim, welcome. Would you like to be put into a regional breakout group? If you're...
Why not, please?
Okay, so we're going to be doing Pacific here, but their options are national level, Pacific, or Central Canada, or prairies.
Wherever you need me, Maria. I could do Pacific or national, but you put me where you want me.
Okay, I will leave you here with me in this Pacific group. So everybody here, we should be all assigned now. If there's anybody left within my group here that is not wanting to do a Pacific focus and wants to be put into another breakout room, can you just please let me know now, and I can go ahead and move you. It's kind of like a speak now or forever hold your peace moment here. Okay, so it looks like we are all good to get started. I am just simply going to set a little timer on my phone so that I know when the breakout rooms will be over, so that I can give the notice to everybody else. It's hard to do both. I'll know that for the next round. Okay, so I've set the group out. All right, everyone. So thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be going through the messaging triangle here in the frame of the energy transition. So we're going to do it as a little bit of an exercise here. So the goals are really for us to just connect with each other here today, build some relationships, share some insight, and then do a little bit of reflection and practice on how to apply the messaging triangle into our work. So I'm just gonna go around and ask everybody to give a short 30-second introduction. So I'll get started. Like I said, my name is Maria Granados. I'm with the Climate Narratives Initiative. I'm the communications coordinator, and I am calling from Treaty 7 territory, which is Calgary, Alberta. So I'll pass it on to Liza. Oh, Liza, you're just on mute.
My name is Liza, and I am in Nanaimo territory, Vancouver Island, which is also known as Nanaimo. I am the coordinator for community climate circles based here on the island.
Great, thank you so much. Jim.
I'm Jim Boothroyd. Hello, everybody. I'm the project director for Eco-Analytics Research Initiative, which is a cooperative market research project on the shared platform of Makeway. I'm based on the traditional unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam First Nations.
Great. Shelley?
I am also in Nanaimo, or else with Nanaimo territories, unceded territories. I'm retired teacher and also involved in the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub.
Great to have you here. How about Christy, are you here with us? Christy might not be here. Elise? Elise Mackey? Or is it, sorry, is it Clace? All right, well, it might just be the four of us right now. But everyone else can jump in as if they want to. So I just popped in a document in the chat here. So this is a bit of a worksheet that we're going to work through to kind of try to get us to get those creative juices flowing. So the first thing that I want us to think about is maybe selecting an audience that we want to target. Also, I just want to say this is not a test. This is just an opportunity for us to practice using the triangle. So yes, does everybody have access to the worksheet that I put in the chat? All right, so we're thinking about it. We're in the Pacific region. is there a key audience that we want to engage to talk about the energy transition to? That is a bit of a tough one because I know there's lots of different audiences, but maybe try to think about some of the groups that you're working with in your personal group and your personal work that we could just take as an example.
Okay, I'm going to be, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
I've come late. You please go first.
Well, with the group, the Nanaimo Climate Action Hub, we're looking at both speaking to counselors in the city, and there's sort of a half and half. It seems like out of the 9 counselors, there are 5 that are kind of, they know what to do with climate change and are interested in actions and pathways and know the benefits and stuff, but the other 4 are not. And so this sometimes has a challenge. So it's the lawmakers or the decision makers.
Okay, so I'm going to say local government decision makers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Liza, is this something that is this a group that you might be interested in working with as well, or?
Yeah, actually, we've got a really awesome city council who's really on board. We've got a pretty good climate action plan. Our problem that we're encountering, we're trying to connect neighborhood groups, and people are afraid of alienating their neighbors with whom they may already have difficult relationships. So we are trying to find ways to access small grassroots groups.
Okay. And then Jim, a question for you. Have you worked with both with either local government or small grassroots groups that you try to reach before? Like, are there any kind of good news about working with these audiences that you might be able to?
Yeah, so I have personally worked quite intensively with community neighborhood-based groups, but that's as a volunteer on a project called Green Block that I authored a few years ago, and it was funded by the Vancouver City Green City Grants. So that's not research, or that's lived experience. And is it Liza?
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, there are some practical tricks which you will know well. There are things to do around food and just community, bringing people into a space where they would not otherwise be able to go. So there are things just to do with the setup, where you organize that. It could be outside at a particular time of year. It could be in a street or a community center or a library, something like that. A place where people want to go and a place where people want to actually get to know their neighbors. So you kind of lever that desire that people have. I found that's useful. Make some fun, build some fun into it. Don't make it too heavy. And in terms of the triangle there, talk about as much as possible the local impacts, not the global. Talk about the local impacts, what we've seen in British Columbia, what we've seen in our neighborhoods. I live in a neighborhood on high ground in Vancouver where a lot of basements were flooded during the rains of last month, and they're all being dug out in the middle of winter. It's costing people tens of thousands of dollars to do that. These are local impacts associated with climate change and resiliency. I would work on a combination of mitigation and adaptation messaging. And I think, Maria, you could probably tell Liza more about the work that Kara's done around adaptation conversations, which can bring conservative people into a conversation where they might not be willing to talk about mitigation off the top. So those are some thoughts. Like adaptation, preparedness are things that conservative-minded people care about. And that provides an opening. If you do it in a sympathetic and not judgy way, you will find that people are willing to begin, hey, you know, well, if we're doing all this adaptation, why don't we, you know, is there something we can do to mitigate this problem? That's the way the thinking seems to, there's some evidence that works with conservative audiences.
Our problem is
Taking
that we've
money.
been largely attracting people who are already, we're kind of preaching to the converted. And many of them are already quite busy. We're trying to get people to set up groups themselves. So we're, kind of like that telephone game, where we're trying to educate connectors who can then go out and connect with 10 other people and organize their neighborhood groups. So we have no problem connecting those people, but getting them to approach their neighborhoods or their church circles or work circles or whatever has been really difficult.
What are you asking them to do when they connect with other people?
We started out with a 6-hour training session. It's now been reduced to an hour and a half or 2 hours. And it can be done by Zoom, or it can be done in their homes or parks, as you suggested. And we supply all the materials for them, all the video presentation, the stats, and so on. So,
do you have anything around food?
That's been challenging for us because of COVID. So we've held back on that, but maybe we should go back to an in-person format.
Food is good, but there's food from two angles. One, food from the point of view of a convening leverage. Two, food from a point of view, people are very interested in their diets. And we found what we did in Green Block was we had a survey that we asked people to do to measure the footprint using Jenny Moore's ecological footprint modeling. We asked them to measure their household ecological footprint based on their food consumption, their recycling, and their energy consumption. And people were very interested in the outputs from that. Very conservative people, as well as more progressive-minded people. And if you want to know more about this, look at Project Green Block on the Evergreen site. And there's a full evaluation that's being done of this. We saw a 16% decrease in neighborhood ecological footprint among participants over a 1-year period. That was the average. And so that's a practical thing that people can do to learn about their own. People tend to be interested in learning about their own consumption.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely look that up. Do you have a website or?
Yeah, well, I would just, I think it's all on the Evergreen website because Evergreen Canada was the original sponsor of it. But if you Google Project Green Block, you'll probably find the evaluation. It was done, it was an independent evaluation done. We scaled this up across 7 neighborhoods, I think, in Vancouver. But anyway, that's just one approach. The other one I would tell you to look at or advise you to check out, and you probably know about this already, is CALP's Cool Hood Champs modeling. And that's based out of UBC, the Center for, it stands for, they're basically urban forestry people. Do you know that, I can't remember what CALP stands for. You'll see it. Stephen Shepard is the guru of this. And he is right now trying to scale this up provincially. And that's all around urban forestry. So looking at your tree canopy and getting to know, everybody wants to talk about trees. And in light of the heat dome last year, there should be keen interest in that. What can you do to ensure that squirrels can travel from one end of the block to the next without coming down to the ground?
We're in the process of putting together a questionnaire that we're going to send out to people, and that will involve food. We're giving away gift cards, a draw for gift cards at restaurants that feature local food. So we're trying to find some incentive to get people involved because by and large, people just have this assumption that somebody else is going to deal with this, right?
People do want to know their neighbors, though, I find. And I live in a kind of a very solid, comfortable neighborhood in Vancouver of detached homes, and people don't know their neighbors at all. They don't know their names, and they do have there are a fair number. Some people don't want to know their neighbors at all, but a fair number of them will just come out because they want to know what that person's name is and share a meal with the person. And so if you do it that's an incentive. Another incentive is gifts that you give. You get local businesses to to provide what we did with getting people onto the survey. And we got 25 households in a block of about 100 households to participate. We invited them, we had a little competition. We invited them to apply or agree to do the survey of their household ecological footprint, and we got local businesses to contribute meals or various gifts, and they seem willing to do that. So those are just some ideas. But in terms of like the pyramid, I'm talking too much. Sorry.
No, that's great, Jim. I think it's really helpful to learn from what has maybe worked for you, and I think it's just really, this is like a very low pressure space. It's just an opportunity for us to learn from each other here.
Yeah. And it's good to know what has happened in other places and what has worked and what hasn't. And I agree, food and fun are some of the biggest things. And another was having a fire as a sort of a gathering place and that sort of thing, to the 3 Fs. Yeah.
Food, fun, and fire. Can't really go wrong with that. But so we have about 8 minutes left here, but I was just maybe hoping to ask you guys, are there any questions in terms of the messaging triangle that you're still holding in terms of how you might apply this technique to your work? Or is there something that stood out for you that maybe you are interested in using it in your work, but you're maybe trying to figure out how you might weave this in to your campaigns or the groups that you are communicating with currently?
I guess sort of when you are in that conversation, pinpointing what the other person is really concerned about and finding out where their concerns are, or their values, if you've never met them before, or you don't want to probe too much to like in a sense of being intrusive or whatever, but you need to know that information in order to have that conversation and bring it to these common values that we have and share. And then, and then you can move on to the pathways and the benefits, because then you're talking a common language, you're talking a common set of values, you're talking, you're a like person, like, and also you may be then seen as a person of, this person isn't an enemy or someone who's just trying to push me to do something that I wouldn't normally want to do.
Yeah, that's great. Jim or Eliza, how do you tend to, like, within community conversations, what's something that's worked for you in order to get to, boil down these shared values and concerns? How do you get to know that without being intrusive, like Shelley was wondering?
I think one of the biggest things we encountered is that people feel intimidated, that you're somehow the expert with all this information, and keeping language really simple, but also acknowledging that we're not experts, that we're in this together. I know that's a horrible cliche, but that we're all learning together how we can change things. It's not like, I'm purer than you are, I'm vegan, I have an EV and all that kind of stuff, right? So making sure that you acknowledge to the group that you're in the same process, the same struggle that they are.
Yeah, Shelley, I'm going to share with you in the chat a link to a really great video. So Science Moms is a group out of the States, and they do some really good work on just around how to talk, how to have these difficult conversations. And I think that this video that I'm going to share with you, there's an oceanographer who was talking to her friend, and she's really setting the stage and talking about what she values, and then kind of like inviting the other person to share those values with her as well. So I think when you begin the conversation by sharing what's important to you and maybe why you're doing the work that you're doing, kind of setting the stage, it opens up the floor for more conversation. And I think people feel a little bit less vulnerable when you show that you're just a human talking about the things that you care about, and this is why it's important for you to take action. So I'm gonna put that in the chat here. It's just a few minutes long, and you can watch that on your own time, but I think that they do a really great job there. Jim, do you have any advice for beginning these tough conversations and connecting with others?
Yeah, I guess
the heat domes, the higher sea level rise,
Sorry.
climate change.
Sorry.
So I agree with you, Maria. I think it's important to give something of yourself. And I found the story of me, the story of us, and the story of now.
Sorry. Stop. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll stop. I'll mute.
So the story of me, the story of we, the story of us, and the story of now, I find a very good kind of approach, and that's the Marshall Gans technique for basically saying a little bit about what your values are and what your story, what brings you to this conversation in your life. So, for example, I've talked about in sessions, I've talked about my catching a salmon for the first time as a child, and how a magical experience that was for me, and how it kind of connected me with salmon and fish. And then in my teens, watching the salmon decline in the house sound where I grew up over a period of decades, just watching the salmon just die away, and how that impacted me. And then I talk about us, and I talk about the story of now, the opportunity. So it kind of picks up on some of the points of your triangle as well. And the story of now is basically the benefits, the challenge, and the benefits that we can achieve if we meet this challenge. So I find that works. Being human, not, yes, exactly what Liza is saying about not coming over as a know-it-all. And then activities, like, you know, this is just one way of doing it. We chose in our project to have shared activities that folks agreed on among themselves, they owned. And it led to a whole kind of a mushrooming of different things that we did together. We had a kind of a thermal energy group, we had a repair and sharing group, and we had a collective gardening group, all for our neighborhood, and each developed proposals for doing projects together. Eventually, the project itself failed, really kind of sadly. The project was a collective garden to take over a street and repurpose it as a park. And it ran into stiff opposition from people who wanted their parking spots. But it didn't matter, because it bound about 15 of us together and kind of created a nucleus of common experience. And I still connect with these people. They're people I will go to sign a petition, and we've done stuff together. So I think that was the outcome, the aim of our project. But anyway, that's an example. Sort of shared activities are good things.
Great, thank you so much, Jim. So I'm gonna just bring everybody back into plenary here, and then I think we're gonna do just a little bit of a summary of hearing what everybody else covered in their breakout rooms. So I'm just gonna close all of the rooms now. And then people will be joining us in about a minute here. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us back here again. I'm excited to hear about the conversations that you had in your breakout rooms. There's still a few, probably about 20 seconds or so before everybody else is here again, but we'll just give them a minute.
Okay.
Welcome back.
I feel like we could have talked for about 10 or more minutes easily, but yeah, we had a great and juicy discussion. Right now, I'm really curious for the facilitators, if we could go around, and I'm going to ask you to actually raise your hand if you facilitated a conversation, because I'm not that organized. Yeah, Gisela.
Lucky me. I was hoping that other people would go first. But so you're asking for my 30-second sort of recap of what we did?
Yeah, okay. Whatever best, first thought, best thought.
We had 2 competing audiences, and it took us a while to sort of define them and then choose between them. So we ended up choosing youth, and the challenge that we identified for youth was that they don't see a pathway to a healthy, prosperous future for themselves. And I should maybe say that this was a national focus group. So we talked about the challenge and how people feel that the present is already precarious. They don't feel like they have a lot of control or agency. And then we got into the pathway, and we got as far as identifying that there were collective actions and individual actions that could be offered. And then the time ran out.
Okay, thank you. Meredith.
Great. Yeah, I think we could have used extra time too. We had a really great discussion talking about, obviously, how there's not one public, so really segmenting these different audiences and thinking about sometimes that audience may have different values than yourself. So the challenge around connecting with folks with different life experiences, talking about folks maybe coming from the resource extraction industry and talking with those individuals, and not painting them kind of as the bad guys who are feeling attacked. Talked about that. Also, interesting audience segment that we talked about too was tourism and recreation, and how that can be a challenge with folks feeling like they're taking a break from life and not necessarily wanting to think about tough challenges like climate change when you're on vacation. So having that. And also talked about really identifying trusted messengers for talking with folks. So making sure that we're, understanding where folks are coming from, and identifying the individual or individuals that kind of have that best relationship and trust. And then talked about the political challenges too. So building that kind of groundswell of public support with these segments, so that decision makers feel like they can really lead.
Awesome, thank you. Sabrina.
Hi, Amber. I know that you are a homeowner with a very old home. Did you know that most homes are extremely inefficient when it comes to energy use? This is expensive, and in fact, it's very bad for the climate, and buildings are a huge part of the climate problem. Here's the great news though. All you really have to do is get an energy audit, and then you can get plugged into all these great programs that are talking about, great programs that are offering money to do retrofits, especially right now. And some of the examples of the kinds of things you can do, you can replace your insulation, you can put in new windows. You will find out through the audit what it is you can do. You're going to impact your pocketbook, you're going to impact the climate. And on a large scale, if thousands of us do this, we'll have a very big impact on our GHG emissions from our buildings. So really, there's no reason not to do it right now. Save money, help save the climate, easy and cheap. I don't know what else you'd want.
Sabrina, you are literally speaking my love language as somebody who's like looking at windows and doors right now. So love it. Thank you. Nailed it. Colleen.
Yeah, following that is a very hard act to follow, but in our group, we had 2 people, by coincidence, such a small world, who are working on flood management, stormwater management with their city on the city level. And so they had different audiences. They have the homeowner, yes, but they also have businesses talking about preventing pollution with businesses. And they also have the municipality and city staff and educating the general public. So we talked about all those audiences rolled into one sort of theme, and then how to connect it a little bit more directly with the actual need to transition. So we benefits and solutions, making it part of the everyday lives. We started talking about green spaces and, you know, permeable surfaces and connecting the idea of heat islands and preventing heat islands. So connecting it to health and connecting that all back to the need to mitigate as well as adapt, right? So making the connection to the things we need to do to prevent more flooding. And we talked about in Ontario, pointing out BC and showing just how bad it can get if we don't do something now. Cost, insurance, the audience is worried about insurance and legalities and costs. So bringing in some of the benefits of acting now and doing things now in that respect. And just our group had just a lovely conversation about making it more accessible to people, making it more obvious that this was something that's going to impact their lives more and more. So it was a great discussion. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Lucy.
Hi there. Our group, we had a suggestion that we looked at service areas, and then we narrowed that down to Rotary as an example. We discussed that you really had to research and know your audience, their values and interests. So we put together fairness, justice, likely business connections, community resilience, public connections. We thought some of the challenges were from climate disruption were breakdown of networks, personal connections that this group valued, climate events shift resources and focus, concern for future of their communities, and concern about challenges with international work. The pathways we had were to reach out to and connect with First Nations that were in nearby community. That would be beneficial for relationships, maybe giving our Rotary team a different perspective, a place to gather information, ideas, just a good starting place. There were other places to gather information that came up, ways of bringing in speakers, etc. They could explore civic literacy, maybe an opportunity to figure out how to have their feedback through elected channels. And then tangible benefits were resilience through this networking. It's a real skill set and value for this group. Personal and community health, physical health, air quality impacts. They would have more information to participate in their community and dialogues that were being held in other places, and an opportunity to demonstrate leadership from the Rotary audience. And my team had 400 other ideas. That's just highlights. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucy. Okay, Kendall, and we are going to really try to wrap up at 12:15. So Kendall, over to you for a quick summary.
Yeah, just briefly, we were mostly working at the federal level, and so we talked a lot about how that's challenging because the audiences are so different across the country, and recognize the importance of understanding the audience, what they care about, and making sure that all stakeholders have a chance to have their voices heard. We also talked about considering emotions, especially around climate change, and how people are concerned about their livelihood and their families, as well as the sort of effects of climate change. So some of the recommendations that we came up with were to try to bring it down from the federal level to something that's more personal, whether that's the provincial level or municipal level. But yeah, just we mostly talked about how it was a challenge, and the fact that making it personal is the goal.
Okay, thank you. Katie.
Okay, forgive me, team, for not capturing all of your great stuff here. We had a few folks from Sudbury and Lanark County, so we looked at rural communities. We talked a lot about some of the understanding the audience. Maybe there was a fear of loss of identity or loss of way of life, the connection to natural outdoor pursuits, some leisure, some more subsistence focused, like hunting and fishing, and snowmobiling and swimming in the summer and so on. We talked about how energy poverty was an important factor in many communities. And then we looked at like who would be messengers that we could connect with, talked about faith community, maybe local pastors, community leaders like the head of the Snowmobiling Association, labor, local businesses, Rotaries as well. And then started talking about high school students and how they're amazing levers for change when they bring the message home to their families. And then in terms of the benefits, we decided to focus on looking at housing affordability, partly from the energy poverty side, and also because we knew it was important to have the justice be a critical lens through which we looked at this. So we looked at the benefits from indoor air quality and other health benefits, to safety, to job creation within the community. And even innovative things like co-housing, allowing people to combat loneliness and have seniors stay in their homes longer, and more people affordable home. Yes, Sabrina, who knows all about co-housing. Along the way, we touched on some of the threats. I mentioned a few around affordability and so on, but we didn't get a chance to put it all together. But there was some really ripe beginnings, and yeah, it's nice to be with you all and hear some of these from the other groups as well.
Thank you, Maria.
All right, so our group, I'll just do a quick recap and then I'll close us out here. Our group didn't necessarily get into the messaging triangle, but we talked about more just like high level questions that we were still holding. And we had a really good conversation about how we can get to know our audience and what they value in a way that's not intrusive, and how we might be able to have those conversations and begin to understand that common ground. And so just some advice that was really shared, is to use this kind of framework of the story of me, the story of we, the story of us, the story of now, to begin those kind of maybe difficult conversations and set that common ground, and be able to start to connect with your audience there. So it was just kind of like a higher level, but it was still a really fruitful conversation there.
Okay, before we close off, I feel compelled to offer what happened in my group. So we chose local city councilors as a key audience, and some of the things that they're concerned about is like a broad range of constituent issues, often competing. So sustainability might be set aside, poverty or housing, et cetera. And that offering kind of practical programs like installing, a business case of a local group, pitching a business case to install solar panels as a business opportunity, not necessarily just as a climate, offering a program around rebates for more resilient building materials for housing, or for roofs, in hail zones, that kind of thing. So like really talking about practical things that would benefit residents is a good entry into is what those people care about. One of the things that was kind of still kind of circling for people around the benefits is how ready people need to be for how localized, like benefits are, kind of like broad, like, community level or like global, but also, in terms of personal benefits. So just like really thinking through and wanting to have more conversation about, how detailed do you get, like from a strategy perspective. So I'm going to stop there, but I personally could have talked about that for a long time, and we had a very interesting mix of people. Maria, I think that we need to close. It's 12:15. I beg people to stay on one more minute. From here, we will be releasing and sharing the actual document itself. We also are interested to know if people would be wanting to come back in 3 or 6 months' time from here and talk more about how your experiences of trying to apply this in the work that you're doing. So Maria, I'm just going to hand it over to you to kind of make sure that that was the question that we had, and then to close and let people out.
Yeah, so that was two. It's in two parts. So the first one is I have a quick poll just to gauge interest in a series on message testing using A/B testing, canvassing, informal focus groups, narrative workshops, seeing if people are interested in kind of taking more of a deep dive on those different techniques. And then, so I'm just going to launch that poll here very quickly.
So while you're doing this, just to say, we're looking at potentially hosting a series of small mini workshops on different techniques of how we can test and measure and better understand what's working and what's not working. And so we're just looking for some feedback of what would be of interest to you, and if you would like to continue this conversation.
And then my final closing statement is always I'm looking for feedback on how the workshop went, what you liked, what you didn't like, and every answer is appreciated and everything helps us improve our future events. So I'm just going to put the link in the chat here for our Survey Monkey. And if you could just take a minute of your time at the end of this to provide some feedback, that is greatly appreciated. And like Amber said, I will follow up via email with the link to the playbook, some of the great resources that were shared here, and a bit of a blog post that we're working on to summarize the triangle. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you for joining us here today and for all of the great conversations. And happy holidays, and we'll see you again in the new year, hopefully.
Thank you very much, everyone. So we'll stay on, and please do fill out the poll, fill out the survey, and have a great remainder of your day.
Thanks, everyone.